what I want to do tonight is simply introduce the concept, and I want to look at it from the lens of our culture and ask some questions about it, but also apply a bit of common sense. Okay? So I won't be going into the medieval thinking, but I will be looking at it just from a common sense point of view, and also we're going to do a bit of economics. Okay? And in fact, we're going to do the most important bit of economics that there is. And for a while, again, when I was kind of really lively about this stuff, I used to ask my graduate students that would come along to do, courseworks, masters and things. And I'd say, did you do economics as an undergraduate? And some of them would say yes. And I'd always ask them the same question. I'd say, well, what was the most important thing that you learned from economics? And they always gave me the same answer. I'm going to tell you what that answer was as we go along tonight. So there's one really, really important thing. In fact, a lot of my students, when I did this little straw poll survey, told me that there was only one thing that really sort of came away with from their economics that was useful, and that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And that's why we're going to be using that as a window into this question of just price. We've been taking an approach with what we've been talking about of a social perspective, not socialist, but social. The idea that human beings are made to hang about with each other, and we've made a big thing about the family and all that sort of stuff. And I want to suggest that trade is part of our social nature, and it helps us to express ourselves as person, be mates with people, be friends with people. It also helps us materially to achieve the comforts that we need, because we are body and soul. And so our bodies do need a certain amount of care. Okay? So trade as exchange is a useful thing. And I'm talking about exchange of positive contributions, in that I can help you, you can help me, we're both better off. That's positive contributions. I'm giving you something useful, you're giving me something useful. Okay? There are other exchanges that we can have, where I can come along and say, I'm going to punch you in the nose if you don't, give me your shoes. Right? That's an exchange, not necessarily so positive. You might punch me back, and so we have an exchange, we have like a social relationship. Marx kind of said that that's the way that society all worked. Right? Conflict, okay? Not positive. Okay? One way or another, when we do exchange material things, I give you the shoes I make, you give me the food that you prepare or what have you. We've got the question of price. And this is going to be the first thing we're going to be looking at. And this is the question which really causes the most concern. In fact, you could say that economics is largely about the question of price, question of value. Now, you may not think that, because economists are often talking about inflation and and employment and all sorts of other things. But ultimately, they're talking about the prices of those things. And in economics, a lot of the doings has to do with working out the right price. And so we're all in that activity. So if we're thinking about just price, that's certainly something that an economist can say, yeah, I'm trying to work out the correct price. He wouldn't say just price necessarily. One way or another, price has to be some relative kind of weighting of these positive goods, positive contributions that we make to each other in exchange. We have to accept that people are both producers and consumers. And that's kind of part of our, we could be all consumers. I could just kind of sit back, feed me, clothe me, right? And if I've got some kind of power, maybe you might have to do that. Or I could be a slave, and I could be just producing and not really consuming a great deal. But by and large, in an ordered society, in a real society where people are actually treating each other with some kind of human dignity, we're going to be both those characters. Right? So we're going to look at that as we go along. The first person to really look at this question was, well, in a systematic way that we know about, was Aristotle. Aristotle, in actually a few places, There are two books of Aristotle's that are really worth getting to know, and they're very simple. They're simply called his Politics and his Ethics, Nicomachean Ethics, and they're both quite readable. And in those, you'll find lots of references to economic things. But a really important concept that Aristotle gives us is this notion, especially of natural exchange. And this is really the first systematic treatise on the fundamentals of economics that we have, to the extent that we can really say that Aristotle, as much as he was a philosopher, also gave us, if you like, the bones of economics. And you probably notice I come back to him from time to time. I think he dealt with the four fundamental principles that you need to put into any economic solution. And they have to do, last week we looked at property, this week we're looking at price, we're going to talk about money later on, and after all we're going to be looking at the question of what to do with all the extra wealth that we've got lying around. So the four principles. But Aristotle's work on property last week we saw was that unusual thing, that idea of a dual theory of property, which was inherited by the Catholic Church and other people. This week we're going to be looking at Aristotle's thinking about price, and here he's talking about exchange, and particularly this notion of natural versus unnatural exchange. Competition is supposed to solve the problem of price by effectively forcing the price down to something very close to, hopefully ideally identical to, the normal cost of production. That's economic theory. Now you know. A couple of little wrinkles though. At the point where you have a perfect market price, prices will be happening at the normal cost of production, but also the supplier knows what the market's like, and so the supply curve will actually follow the normal cost of production line. I won't go into how that's constructed, but also the purchasers will. So in a perfect market, you'll have that lovely stability, that, I won't say equilibrium because that's an economic term, but this peace almost in the marketplace. So everyone knows the circumstances and everyone wants to play by that. That largely comes as a result of a number of things happening in the marketplace, at least according to economic theory. They include things like you have to have lots and lots of suppliers in order that they will be competing with each other. You also have to have lots and lots of buyers, because again, they have to be able to be mobile. You have to have people who don't have to buy. If I'm like the person needing the water out in the desert, I don't really have a lot of choice whether I buy water or not. I just need it. And so there's this assumption that nobody actually needs anything. Now, a little while ago, we were talking about Homo economicus. This was a couple of weeks ago. Now, Homo economicus has got the advantage that it wouldn't pay a lot of money for water out in the desert, because Homo economicus doesn't have flesh and blood, doesn't die. Human beings aren't like that. We're not as smart as we need to be able to make these kind of decisions. We're not smart, we're not mobile, we're not indifferent, there aren't enough of us, and in practice we often find that one side of the supply or demand equation is bigger and stronger than the other, and so you don't have the balance. So for lots and lots of reasons, we actually never get to this effect. Okay? Economics is all on the assumption that we get down to this price, and then we can believe economic theory, because whatever economic theory predicts once you got that price will actually give you good economic policy. However, if it's not happening, if you have any of these imperfections, you have real people rather than Homo economicus, you have imbalance in the numbers of people or their indifference or what have you, you won't have a perfect market. But a perfect market does have the advantage that it will force prices to be at that optimum. That's at least the theory of it. And that gives you perfect market, competitive price, an efficient market, all expressions meaning more or less the same thing. Now I want to change horses a little bit. That's modern economic theory, and that's the way it solves the problem. And you'll notice it brings price down to the normal cost of production. by the external force of the market. It's not by the choice of the buyer or the seller. The seller would like to sell for more, the buyer would like to buy for less. They're actually forced by competition. Just one little aside. If somebody is forced to do something, is the thing that they do, therefore, an exercise of their own moral action? Okay, if you are forced to walk a little way across the road or to shoot somebody, does that mean you're a good bloke or a bad bloke because you did those things? It's not. So in a curious sense, the market that we've been looking at actually has no morals to it, because the actors inside it are not acting morally, even if they do good things or bad things or whatever they do, because the market forces are actually on their back forcing them. So the curious thing about the market is that it achieves supposedly a moral outcome, which is good for society, the common good, but it does it by preventing the actors, the buyers and the sellers, from acting morally. Nobody in a perfect market acts morally. It's actually based on the assumption that people can't do it anyway. Okay, I want to now jump away from all that. I want to go back to Aristotle. Aristotle believed that people could make moral decisions, I think. Seems to be all the way through his moral deliberations, or even his political deliberations. He approached this question of exchange in a completely different way. He approached it by saying, let's have a look at the basic need that's here. I might need a cup, you might need shoes. And so the exchange that we're likely to make is that I will give you the shoes that I have over, and you'll give me the cups that you have over. We'll both be better off. Okay? And he introduced this delightfully simple, almost quaint notion of equality. And you'll find that equality is a really big thing in the ancient philosophers. Plato uses it a lot. It sort of lurks behind Aristotle a lot. He's not saying how you do equality just yet, but certainly this notion of equality is really important. And so the idea is, if you give me cups that equal shoes, we're both happy, and if you like, there's a balance there, a moral balance. If there's inequality, then there is something kind of going wrong with that exchange. One of us is exploiting the other. Okay, so if I give you, what am I giving you? I'm giving you shoes, and I give you only half as many shoes as the cup is worth, I'm stealing from you. That's kind of fairly easy to understand, isn't it? Yeah. So we've got to have this balance. And so basic exchange, which is a social thing, helps us, all that stuff, is based on equality. As well as that, Aristotle recognized that in practice, it might not quite be as simple as the cobbler exchanging with the potter between shoes and cups. It's far more complex kind of set of exchanges that we need in society. We need to exchange. Some people have got clothes that they want to sell, they want houses, and they want food. And the people that are producing the food will want the clothes and the houses, and and it all gets kind of very complicated. And so we need some intermediary in there to be able to mediate this exchange of commodities, especially when you've got to do intermediate exchanges to go and get what you really want. But it's all based on equality. Aristotle said that the medium of exchange that we use is money. And the idea is that while I might really want a meat pie, I might have cups. You might want cups. No, I've got cups. You might have shoes over. I'll give you my cup so that I get your shoes, because I know that over here there's a chap who's got meat pies who really need shoes. All right, and I can sort of go around trying to work all that out all the place, and it'll take a long time. It would be far easier if I give you the cup, you give me some money, which is the value of the cup, instead of equal value in shoes. then I go along with the money, buy the meat pie, I'm happy, right? So in a sense, the cup goes to where it needs to go, the meat pie goes to where it goes, and we can sort of circle around. That's kind of pretty obvious. Now, again, we stay with the notion of equality. And that gives us the idea that money is the medium of exchange. Now, you've heard that expression many, many times, but it's got a power that most of the time we ignore. Right? It's the middle term. The social optimum is where the eventual balance of the commodities, which are at either end of this equation, are equal. Yeah, okay, what are you making a big thing about? You know, right? But really, that's what we want to be able to do. I want to be able to sort of go to sleep at night feeling that I can go to bed at peace, thinking I haven't ripped anyone off, by thinking that the cups that I've sold today are in fact equal to the meat pies that I've eaten. Otherwise, I might feel guilty, okay, because I've been stealing, and I don't want to be, stealing. And when you get into the economy, it gets really complicated because I don't even know who I'm stealing off. Have I charged too much for my cups, or yeah, anyway. But it's kind of, at this stage, we'll just look at this notion of equality. The equality between the commodities, even though I use money as the medium of exchange. The nice thing about it is that it encourages community, and I would say that it encourages trust and material efficiency. Why does it encourage trust? If I'm selling my shoes to somebody I'm selling my cups for a fair price, you don't need to be concerned about what I'm doing if you know that I'm selling them for a fair price. You don't need to go and check out the price of 5 different potters. Likewise, when I go to buy the meat pies, I don't have to check yours out and go across to Coles and down to Woolies and da-da-da-da-da, all that sort of stuff. I simply go to the first one. I don't even have to know very much about pies, because I know that you're an honourable man and you're going to be sort of selling me your pies for what they're worth in money. And so I don't have to know anything about it. I don't have to waste time. That trust is really useful. It's kind of the opposite of what you get when something else happens and you have to go around and do all this checking out all the time. And we'll get onto that as we go along. Okay. Look at the structure here. I'm going to change the structure a little tiny bit because I'm going to look at what a merchant does. Because I would say, or Aristotle said, that some exchanges don't start with a commodity with the object of ending with an equal commodity. They actually start with money. Works like this. I wake up in the morning and I've got a little bag of gold under my bed, and I go out and I suss out what's happening around the place, and I spend my money to buy something, right, with the intention of carting it around and finding someone who's willing to pay me more for that. And so my aim is to start off with my little bag of money, turn it into a commodity, which I intend to turn into another bag of money later on in the day. And what do you know about the bag of money at the end of the day compared to the bag of money at the beginning of the day? It'll be bigger. And that's my whole object. My whole object doesn't really care about the commodity I use. It could be roofing iron today, it could be lawnmowers tomorrow, it could be rocket ships the day after. It doesn't really matter, as long as I find situations where I start off with a little bag of money and I finish with a big bag of money. Right? And Aristotle said that's very common. However, there's a problem. I start off, the money is turned into a commodity with this equality. And then the commodity is turned into the other bag of money with an equality. Is there a problem with that? Well, the problem, fairly obviously, is that it can't be two equalities, because the whole purpose of this game is inequality. Somewhere along the way, the commodity somehow has two values. Aristotle said that's unnatural. That violates equality. And if you know me well, I think equality is a lovely way to work out your moral thinking for a lot of things. I use equality to show why telling lies is naturally immoral. And you can do that simply with an equal sign. Here, we're seeing something which starts to look, it's kind of creepy when you first, whoa, this is a bit of a surprise. Looks the same, CMC versus MCM dash. But it changes. I used to do exercises with my students where I'd give them little, case studies. Just imagine you're on a desert island and you're kind of a tribe, and you do some exercise. I'm actually thinking you do it with you guys, but we won't sort of go into that. Just to sort of get a feel for what this natural versus unnatural exchange is. The thing about natural exchange is that it encourages trust, it encourages efficiency, because you tend to be exchanging on the basis of natural costs, like normal costs. You don't have to waste time ferreting around checking things out. You don't have to be concerned about being ripped off, right? Because you know the intention at every point is to trade on equality. It means the person accepting the money or setting the price is setting it on the basis of what the thing is worth. Right? Turns out that question of what thing is worth becomes a bit of a big question mark, but we'll resolve that as we go along, maybe next week. However, this one is a real worry. It's governed by inequality. How do you actually do it? Do you do it by a set of relationships that are based on trust and honesty? Well, remember, I started off with a little bag of money in the morning, and I sort of ran around the place. What am I actually looking for? People who do not know the value of the commodities and willing to pay less for them than they're worth. So I'm looking for people that don't know what things are worth so that I can exploit them. I can get the better of them. And if they knew better, they'd sell it to me for more. That's the relationships I'm setting out to do. So all of my relationships, are they relationships based on equality and respect? Hardly. And when I get my commodity and I turn it back into the big bag at the end of the day, again, what am I looking at doing? Some dummy who is willing to pay more for stuff than it's really worth. I've got a friend who is he's an advisor for agricultural industries. He specialises in beef cattle up in Queensland. And he talks about what he calls the bigger fool theory. And he reckons that beef cattle properties up in Queensland right now are vastly overvalued. And he says the only reason that it works is that because people come in who are a bit foolish and pay too much for their cattle property. They work it for a few years, lose a lot of money, sometimes they go bankrupt, but they hope that they can find a bigger fool to go and sell their property to when they leave. And if you can find a bigger fool, in other words, they sell the property for more than they bought it for, they get out and they haven't been skinned too seriously, right? There's this bigger fool theory. Right? You're actually looking to exploit the next bloke. Now, when you think about that, the social relations are very, very unusual. They're very different. No longer are you meeting somebody, so you can look at them in the eye. Right? You have to practice being able to look them in the eye while you're lying to them. Right? Is that social? Is that the way that, the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost relate in the Trinity? Hardly. It's something you have to cringe from. This is getting us close to this notion of just price. It's curious that these days we have a different emphasis in what people do when they go to university and study. In the olden days, when I was a boy, people tended to go to university to study science, engineering, maybe liberal arts, right? All because they wanted to do good things and do good things for society, and they had this naive trust that by doing all this good stuff, they would live comfortably and be able to care for their families. Right? Because they had this naive idea that the world worked in terms of natural exchange, where if you did really well for yourself and maybe invented a better mousetrap, or became better at teaching English literature or whatever it was, the community would pay you the right kind of fair price for what you contributed to the community, and the whole world would go along. And there's that sort of naive confidence in that trust of a community kind of relationship. Okay. What occupies most people's thinking when they're considering what university course to do today? You find a lot of people doing engineering today, liberal arts, the sciences. How's that compare to business studies? Huh? What's business studies all about? Let's go through some aspects of it. Let's look at public relations. Public relations, and by the way, that's a polite term for advertising, was started by a chap by the name of Edward Bernays. He was a nephew of Sigmund Freud, the notable so-called psychologist, psychiatrist. Freud, for my sins, I had to study him in great detail for a while. He was a rogue. Bernays wasn't far behind him, and basically his public relations is a way of hoodwinking people, getting them to believe stuff which is not true in order to make money out of them. And that occupies a lot of people's attention, because you think, well, if I'm more effective at this advertising business, then my business will do well. I'll get a nice big pay rise. Everything's happy. It's all based on unnatural exchange, because that first bullet point is all about looking for the bigger fool. And in fact, cultivating the bigger fool by getting people to think when they go out to buy a toothbrush, they simply don't buy something which cleans their teeth. They buy something which has got a picture of, I don't know, a film star on it or something. Or when you're a kid, it'll be, whatever. So you pay more for the toothbrush than what the thing's really worth. And you want to be seen wearing the right brand of shoes, or having the right smelly stuff under your arms or something, right? And you're made to feel as though you're a second-rate person if you don't have it. And you're all the time aiming, like doing public relations, of creating this illusion of happiness, or actually an illusion of unhappiness, in the community in order to make money out of them, in order to exploit them. Occupies an awful lot of people's smarts these days. The object is fostering unnatural demand, and then charging the customers for the benefit of using it. Okay, and you can read the rest of that. It's seldom organised towards true information. And I find, and now my university is all talking about their brand. I think, whoa, this is weird. Right? We're not talking about the quality of what we're doing. We're talking about how popular we can project ourselves. We're creating an illusion, which is something that Machiavelli would be quite proud of, but in a sense is quite inhuman. It all comes down to having a community which is focusing more and more on unnatural exchange rather than natural exchange. And so we're turning into a community which celebrates exploitation rather than, say, the earlier, what people were doing just after the Second World War, where people were going to universities and TAFEs and so on to learn to become engineers and scientists. Okay, so there's that change of emphasis. So you can see that this little change between natural and unnatural exchange goes back to Aristotle, has tremendous effects on far more than simply what I sell my cup to you for. It changes the whole character of your culture, because your best and brightest are no longer becoming scientists, they're becoming confidence men. Okay. And I think we've talked about that kind of change. You see, and if you look, you can see that in history, like in our history, in living history. We've seen that change. I think it's actually been coming through our culture now for the last 500 years, and I would like to suggest that the rot started with the beginning of modernity. And when Max Weber suggested that capitalism was a product of the Protestant Revolution, the Protestant religion, I don't think he was far off the mark, as much as he has his critics. Something about Protestantism does encourage this approach to liberal market work, where it ultimately becomes quite unnatural in its relationships with other people. I think we might leave that now, because to get on to the guilds will take us into something that really deserves a lot more time than we've got. But what I've aimed to do is at least alert us to the problem, okay? And to see trade and price as potentially moral. We haven't answered the question yet. We've simply raised an awareness that there is a moral dimension to it, and it goes a long way further than simply the matter of what I sell some little thing for. It actually goes right to the heart of our culture. And I think it goes to that heart in ways that we haven't had a chance to even start to scratch at yet. But it's mighty, mighty important. And we'll finish there.